Amazing. Okay. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Sofia Freudenstein. I am the ASBI intern for this year. And welcome to our Parsha class, where we look at a sugya in the Gemara and see how it uses a verse from our Parsha, in order to understand our Parsha a bit better. Which is our usual format we've been doing so far, all the way now until Parsha Bo. And we're going to see what we do today. Okay, as usual, I'm going to put a link in the chat for this and also share my screen. Okay. Okay, can everyone? Yes, okay, I think everyone can see. Amazing. Okay, so Parsha Bo, there's lots of things that we could discuss. Last week, we discussed right before the plagues begin. The first 7 plagues occur in Parsha Va'era. While here in Parsha Bo, we only have the final 3, but this is the final 3 that are going to get us to finally be able to leave Egypt, which is very exciting. This Parsha records the first mitzvah that ever is commanded to Bnei Israel as a nation. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, about what that mitzvah is and the significance of that mitzvah, which I'm excited to talk about with you. So our Tanakh sources are pretty short. It is just this pasuk, and we're going to discuss what exactly we think the mitzvah is, maybe why it's important. Then we're going to look at how the Gemara talks about this mitzvah. We'll look at an interesting story or agadah about this mitzvah, and then we'll try and figure out what exactly is bothering Chazal so much about why is this the first mitzvah in the Torah? Why is it so significant? Okay, so let's start off with the first pasuk. Very easy. This is right after the plague of darkness, and now we are figuring out what it means to be a nation, how to leave. But this is what we are commanded. So God says to Moshe to tell Bnei Israel, this month shall mark for you the beginning of the months. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you. So seemingly, reading these psukim, you might not even see a mitzvah. You might not even see a commandment, right? Like it just seems to say this is a month, and this shall be the first month. This month also biblically meaning the month of Nisan. That is when the beginning of the biblical year was, not like Rosh Hashanah and Tishrei for us now. But this is somehow the first commandment. I'm curious, does anyone have maybe any thoughts about what is the sense of commandment? What's the expectation that we should be doing when hearing about the beginning of this first month? Any ideas? Barry, go for it.
It's a trigger event, and it's a commandment for us to differentiate from the way most nations celebrate their New Year.
Okay.
The solar New Year is different, and the Rosh Hashanah is different. It's the anniversary of creation, but this is the anniversary. This is our 4th of July as a new year. This is as a new month, new year. So this is the trigger event. It's where we start our calendar for us. The key word is year for you, meaning the Jewish people. And then it triggers the counting of the first Pesach before we exit Jerusalem. At the time Mitzrayim. At the time we're about to leave Mitzrayim, and then after that, the Pesach sacrifice is different. But this is a time. This is a trigger event that affects. It's like a pebble in the water. Affects a few things.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So the way we mark calendars, often the way we can mark new beginnings, our new beginning as a nation, I think that's definitely there. I think are also like the question is, how does a commandment fall? That shows the significance of it, but what actually then would be the act, right, in connection to it? I think that's still maybe up for grabs out what that actually looks like. Is it just like putting a calendar reminder in your phone, or is there something more significant going on? Does anyone else want to share? Okay. Well, how about we see what the Gemara says? Because we're going to get a better explanation there of what exactly is going on here. So this source is from Masechet Sanhedrin. We've seen Sanhedrin many times now. We had it last week. This is not in the last chapter of Paraphalek, all about the different things that you're not going to be able to go to the world to come for. This is in a section about what the nature of the Beit Din, or the house of judgment, does. And what we're going to see here is that means that there's a lot of rules about what the actual function of the Beit Din is. It's to make sure, with certain legal cases that's covered, but there's also interesting witnessing that the Beit Din is doing. So that's where we're going to be looking at now. I'm going to read the English for the sake of simplicity. Okay. And Rabbi Acha bar Chanina says that Rabbi Asi says that Rabbi Yochanan says, with regard to anyone who blesses the new month in its proper time, it is as if he greets the face of the divine presence. So now we're talking about the beginning of the new month, and the idea is the blessing, right? We were talking about solar and lunar calendars before. This is a lunar calendar. There's a way that we bless the moon. We're going to talk about that and what that means. And what we're equating here is that designating the moon in this way is equivalent to as if seeing the face of God itself. Okay. Alluding to this, it is written here concerning the sanctifications of the new month. This month shall be for you the beginning of months. That's our pasuk. And it's written there where the Jewish people encounter the divine presence at the splitting of the sea. This is my God, and I will glorify him. So what we're doing here is a Gzeira Shava. We're taking two terms that appear in two different psukim, and we're learning one rule or one concept from one and applying it to the other because of the similarity of the term. So how do we know that somehow blessing the moon is the same as facing God face to face? Because in our pasuk, HaChodesh Hazeh, the HaChodesh Hazeh there, and then focusing on the Zeh, in the beginning of Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea, when Bnei Israel are thankful for God saving them from the soldiers of Pharaoh, it says, Zeh Eli ve'anvehu. This is my God, and I will glorify God. And so the focus there is the Zeh and the Zeh. And so because what is this is my God, and I will sanctify or glorify God, that's much more of like a personal encounter between God and humanity. And so too, when we look at the Zeh of talking about sanctifying the new moon and therefore the beginning of the month, is also an opportunity to be divinely connected to God. Okay. This term, this is employed in both verses. So that's the clarification. The school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, if the Jewish people merited to greet the face of their Father in heaven only one time each and every month, it would suffice for them, since the blessing of the moon there is an aspect of greeting the divine presence. Abaye said, therefore, we will say the blessing while standing in honor of the divine presence. So the school of Rabbi Yishmael is saying that we bless the month once a month, right? That's how we mark the differentiations each month. And so what we're saying here is that Bnei Israel have the chance to bless God one time a month, and that's enough for it to be a blessing for the rest of the month. That's enough of an experience for it to be a blessing for Bnei Israel. And Abai mentions that not only this, there's a ritual aspect to this. It's not just a normal blessing, but we should be standing up because we're honoring the divine presence. So just like we would honor a king and stand up, so to here, we should also be honoring God this way. So what we get from this is a textual connection between the beginning of the new month, which is marked by the sanctification of the moon, and then this encounter with the divine. And so just as a clarification, because this wasn't mentioned explicitly before, in Sanhedrin, part of what they used to do is they would take witnesses for all kinds of things, right? Like there were like legal issues, marital issues, and there needed to be witnesses tried out in front of a set of judges. But also declaration of the new month happened via the Sanhedrin. So that's why it's in these rules. So people used to come from all over and say, oh, I saw the new moon, which is like somewhat paradoxical, right? Like, how can you see the new moon? There's nothing there. But they claim that they come see it. And then based off of that testimony, that's when the new month gets announced. So that was a part of the repertoire of what the Sanhedrin or the Beit Din had to do. And not only that, doing that mitzvah was as if seeing God's countenance in and of itself. So I'm curious, based off of this reading, what do you think is so divine out of that experience, right? It's like a little bit of a technicality. It's kind of like checking the weather, saying like, oh, well, is the moon here? Is it not here? And then the Beit Din gets to decide why, other than this connection, there Shavam, the Zeh and the Zeh, what maybe could be something that's holy about this experience? Or what could come to mind for you there? Sure, Barry, go for it. And if anyone else wants to jump in, they're welcome to.
There we go. Sorry. I yield to anybody who wants to speak up, but my thought was a Rashi comment that I read that God, when God created the sun and the moon for celestial light, God, one of them said, I think it was the moon maybe, that two kings can't wear the same crown. So God appoints the sun to rule by day and the moon to rule by night. And by giving the sun the day and the moon the night, the moon was somehow lesser in that fashion. So there's a comment that says God is, my interpretation is that God is paying back the moon for this diminution, if you will, by the Rosh Chodesh sacrifices, and that we should bless the moon, and that we should see God with the moon. It's a kind of a payback kind of thing. I can't quite put it in my own words that makes sense to me other than that. I'm open to anybody who wants to counter me on that. Or,
I understand what you're saying.
Have you seen that kind of comment?
Yeah, let me see if I could try and summarize. You can tell me this is what you were saying. That there's this understanding that the moon is lesser, right? That makes sense, right? The sun is a huge star. They didn't know science, but to know that like the moon is merely reflecting light as opposed to being a light source in and of itself.
Right.
And they do that there's something lesser, but then that's what actually decides our calendar. There's like something nice and sanctifying about that. We're uplifting it. Is that kind of what you were trying to say?
Yes, right. It's consistent very, very much with that it's God's payback for finishing the role of the moon, and that the moon should have a prestige and a status with us. And it has a greater one either that comes later with the relative effect on intercalation and whether or not there should be an extra day of the moon of a month in itself, and also making a leap year with a second Adar. The Sanhedrin is all involved in all these kind of things, and this is all moon related, I think.
Amazing. Doctor, you're with
it's interesting stuff.
Would you have your hand raised? Would you like to share something?
Yeah.
Yeah, but there are so many amazing things, and I have to admit, Sophia, I didn't do my homework yet, and I'm sticking with you. I didn't read ahead about what you're going to bring in, but what I do, can you hear me, by the way?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What I do love, one of the things that I love about this concept is the partnership between God and us, and also nature. Maybe it's a trio, maybe it's not just a partnership of two, but like it's a group work that God has charged us to be involved with nature, that of course that God has created, but that we have a more sensory way of perceiving nature than we do of God. We see that new moon or not, and that we are tasked with keeping track of time, which is something that, here's a whole other interesting philosophical thing about time. Like, does it happen on its own anyway, with the waxing and waning of the moon and the setting and the rising of the sun? But this chosenness, this kedusha, that we are tasked to partner with God through nature to be part of it. We're not passive. We're quite active, and we are commanded to be active in this establishing of time. It's not just recording, it's really establishing.
Great. Right. There's like a sense of agency that we are given in this process. Like, it's not just like calling the shots of what we see, but there's something about us enacting this time that's very powerful. Yeah. I like that. Our sources will get to that. So, wow, you didn't even use the head. It's so exciting. Does anyone else have anything they want to share before we move on? All right, well, let's continue. And if anyone has any thoughts as we go along, be free to share them. So we're going to go now to Masechet Rosh Hashanah, which 2 Gemaras in one day. Hope we'll be able to handle it. And we're going to be reading a story that maybe some of you are familiar with already, about a struggle of rabbinic authority, but it's really like at the locus of this particular mitzvah. And I wondered, based off of like maybe seeing how intense this mitzvah is and following it is, might give us some better ideas of the weightiness of such a mitzvah. So hopefully we will do that together. I also think it's a really fun one if you've never heard it before. And even if you have heard it before, there's still always so much to say. So we're jumping in the middle of Masechet Rosh Hashanah here. There's discussions of like when to call the new year because it's Rosh Hashanah, and so we have all these rules about sanctifying the moon. And there's a bit of a debate about like when a moon is like more hidden or not, like when to exactly call it. So that's what we're jumping into. So it says, Rabbi Yeshua said to him, I see the logic of your statement. The new moon must be established a day later. So based off of some way that they understand the moon, Rabbi Yeshua says, okay, these witnesses came and gave one claim and I believe them. And so now I think that the new moon should be established a day later than what was expected, right? When we have Hebrew calendars, the question is always like, is it 29 days? Is it 30 days? We have Rosh Chodesh, and Rosh Chodesh is sometimes 1 day, or sometimes 2 days. It has to do with the calendar. My father is like a big Luach calendar person, so he'd be able to understand and explain much better than I how exactly some of these days work. Now it's all calculated as well. Like this is, I think it's like such a fun reality to be thinking of, that there used to be witnesses that would like come and run and tell you what the actual date was, as opposed to now it's all established. But one time in camp, a few summers ago when I was there, we actually did this with the kids to kind of teach them about these Mishnayot, and it was amazing. We had throughout the camp different torches to pass on the message that someone decided what day it was, and then they lit a torch and they would light it to another part of the camp. It would signal another camp, which is exactly what they did according to the Mishnayot in Eretz Yisrael itself, because there was no mass WhatsApp message you could send about when you decided the days. And it was significant, right? Because if you had Rosh Hashanah start a day earlier or later, not only would Rosh Hashanah be a different day, but Yom Kippur would be a very different day. And so it'd be important that everyone was kind of kept on track. So that was their way of like mass sending the message to everyone. Okay. Fine. Upon hearing that Rabbi Yeshua had challenged his ruling, Rabban Gamliel sent a message to him. I decree against you that you must appear before me with your staff and with your money on the day on which Yom Kippur occurs, according to your calculation. According to my calculation, that day is the 11th of Tishrei, the day after Yom Kippur. So Rabbi Yeshua is a teacher. He's actually one of the teachers of Rabban Gamliel, which adds an interesting power dynamic to what's going on here. Rabban Gamliel is currently the head of the Jewish community. And he says, okay, great, Rabbi Yeshua, you have a different idea of when you think the month should play out. But I rule that actually the day that you think is Yom Kippur, the 10th of Tishrei, is actually the 11th day of Tishrei based off of witnesses that I got. And so not only can we can't just disagree in like part separate ways. I'm going to make you violate your conceived day of Yom Kippur by carrying a stick and carrying money. So like really muksa, things that you cannot carry during a Shabbat, and Yom Kippur is the Shabbat or Shabbaton. And I'm going to make you travel while you're fasting and all of these things just to show you that you really cannot hold by the day in which you think Tishrei is. I think it's a kind of metaphorical slap in the face. It's like, there's no way we can have a sense of pluralism about this. You need to follow what I'm doing because I am in charge. Okay. Rabbi Akiva went and found Rabbi Yeshua distressed that the head of the great Sanhedrin was forcing him to desecrate the day that he maintained was Yom Kippur. So Rabbi Akiva checked on him, and of course Rabbi Yeshua was very distressed. His idea of what was true was not being taken seriously, and not only that, he couldn't just quietly disagree, he had to actively violate what he believed to be correct. Okay, in an attempt to console him, Rabbi Akiva said to Rabbi Yeshua, I can learn from a verse that everything that Rabban Gamliel did in sanctifying the month is done and is valid. As it is stated, these are the important seasons of the Lord, sacred convocations, which you shall proclaim in their season. This verse indicates that whether you have proclaimed them at their proper time or whether you've declared them as not their proper time, I have only these festivals as established by the representatives of the Jewish people. So Rabbi Akiva is trying to think of a way to console. I think it's beautiful the way he's trying to console Rabbi Yeshua is, you could say, he's trying to provide halachic benefit, but maybe also he's trying to find like a nice pasuk to make him feel better. It's like a nice idea. That's how he consoles him. And he finds a pasuk that maybe you'd you'd recognize in hearing the Hebrew. Ele Moedei Adonai Migrei Kodesh Asher Tikru Otam. This is the psukim that we read for Yom Tov Kiddush. And the idea is that in Vayikra, where they're discussing, just like we just saw at the beginning of Shemot, but in Vayikra, they're discussing all the holidays and how you to know what dates they are, that we're saying these are the important times and you shall proclaim them. So the understanding here is that it's not just that they exist on a calendar, but there's something about our active agency as human beings in deciding when that time is. And that we might have a chance to say something about the calendar that may not be metaphysically true, but that's not the point. The point is that we have the power to not actively say otherwise. We're always trying to strive for what we think is true, but that our say is enough to not necessarily be causing everyone to sin and have the wrong day going, which is very similar to what Dr. Freudenstein was saying before about this idea of agency, of us invoking time, which I think is interesting. Okay. Rabbi Yeshua came then to Rabbi Yosef ben Hyrcanus, who said to him, "If we come to debate and question the rulings of the court of Rabban Gamliel, you must debate and question the rulings of every court that has stood from the date of Moses until now. As it stated, that Moses went up and Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. But why were the names of these 70 elders not specified? Rather, this comes to teach that every set of those 3 judges that stand as a court over the Jewish people has the same status of the court of Moses." So this is interesting. This is now adding not necessarily a halachic factor, but a political or sociological factor to what's going on. Rabbi Yosef ben Hyrcanus is saying, it's not just like Rabbi Yeshua, it's like so beautiful that you feel so attached to your rabbinic idea of what is real, what is true time. But if you challenge Rabban Gamliel, you could think, oh, he's like, maybe a little bit of a stick in the mud. Maybe he deserves to be challenged. But if you really challenge him, we challenge all of rabbinic authority because he's in charge of the entire Sanhedrin. And so by just disagreeing on this one thing, it actually like unravels every other decision that the Sanhedrin makes that is not, declared by God. And it's interesting that they use this pasuk that's actually going to come up in Parsha Mishpatim and a few Parshiot from now, where we see a pasuk about Moses going up the mountain, then Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu, and then the 70 elders. And by not all 70 elders being named, even though I think it'd be very normal to not name 70 elders, it'd be a long list. The way that Rabbi Yosef ben Hyrcanus is understanding it is that though there's not being named is actually an opportunity for us to see ourselves in that list, to see our setups of batei dinim, of houses of judgment or court, to be in that same list of Moshe, Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu of significance, and that therefore us challenging the power of rabbinic innovation, of rabbinic authority, is not just, Rabbi Yeshua wants to prove that he is right, and we should be rebuking Rabban Gamliel for being very strict, but doing so would unravel all the decisions previously. It would be like a kind of coup on the power that the rabbis hold, which I think is fascinating. There's so much to be said. We'll finish that up and then we'll react. Okay. Okay, that was actually when Rabbi Yeshua heard that even Rabbi Yosef ben Hyrcanus maintained that they must submit to Rabban Gamliel's decision. He took his staff and his money in his hand and went to Yavne to Rabban Gamliel on the day on which Yom Kippur occurred, according to his own calculation. So Rabbi Yeshua took these potentially political or sociological concerns very seriously. He believes in the power of a Sanhedrin or human innovation to change what metaphysical reality is in the halachic world. And so because of that, he's going to swallow his own pride, swallow his own sense of what he believes is true, and do what Rabban Gamliel says in order to maintain the sense of power. Okay. So then he goes and he shows up in front of Rabban Gamliel on his conceived day of Yom Kippur. Upon seeing him, Rabban Gamliel stood up and kissed him on his head. He said to him, "Come in peace, my teacher and my student. You are my teacher in wisdom, as Rabbi Yeshua was wiser than anyone else in the generation, and you are my student, as you've accepted my statement despite your disagreement." So Rabban Gamliel, it's fun to win an argument sometimes, so he's quite happy. And the way that he says it is, I find quite difficult. He's explaining that Rabbi Yeshua is incredibly wise and that this shouldn't feel like an attack on his own wisdom, but he is pointing out that he was his teacher, he's wiser than anyone else, and even he concedes to Rabban Gamliel. Feels a little painful, and that also that there's like a sense of power that is created when someone takes on your idea of what halakha is and becomes a kind of student. I find that pretty difficult. I find that's like not necessarily, I don't think Rabban Gamliel had to say it that way. For those of you who are aware of different agadot or stories between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabban Gamliel, this preempts a larger fight that they have, where in front of the entire Beit Midrash, Eventually, Rabban Gamliel shames Rabbi Yeshua for having a different idea of how Mariv should work and makes him stand for many hours in front of them all. And eventually, this is what's going to get Rabban Gamliel kicked out of the baby drash because he doesn't have a nice set of midot, a nice set of values. So it's fun to, I mean, one can discuss like what's the benefit of reading Gemara stories as a kind of narrative. When you read it this way, this is like foreshadowing of maybe what their relationship is going to turn into. But what we see here is that this one mitzvah of understanding how to sanctify or how to start the new month, which turned into sanctifying the new moon, becomes a discussion that isn't just about invoking time, but it's also becomes a huge enough issue that disagreeing on it can actually like tear apart the entire Jewish nation. Not only that, but it can also like ruin all of rabbinic authority, which is a lot of weight. Yes, discretion is the better part of valor. Yeah, so I think it's fascinating that this is the locus of that, maybe also because we can have a sense of pluralism to an extent, but this is a deeper challenge to it. Like, can you really be pluralistic and have different calendars? For those of you who might be familiar with the Karaite Jews, they have a different sense of calendar. They calculate their Omer after Pesach differently than ours. They actually wait till the first Sunday after, as opposed to just right after the holiday, based off of a literal understanding of the text. And therefore their Shavuot ends up being on a different day. And they are halakhically Jewish, but that's incredibly different to have different holidays on different, same holiday on different days. And where is our sense of unity when we don't have the opportunity to all be celebrating on the same day? So I think the story is fascinating. I also love seeing the rabbis as people. I think it's really fun. Does anyone have any thoughts, reactions before we move on to our final synthesis of the sources? Had anyone never heard this story before? Yeah, Barry, go for it.
Thank you. I don't mute. I was the one who said the comment about discretion being the better part of valor, because sometimes it's wise to know when to unify. And I think Rabbi Yeshua took a leap to do that. And Rabban Gamliel recognized that. And he did well. I don't know what happens later. I think I heard what happens later, but I forget how that played out and why. But it's gratifying to see our opposing opinions at such high levels of teaching and wisdom be compromised to the greater good. I think they both. I think Yeshua stepped up and gave Rabban Gamliel the chance to step up, and he did too.
Yeah, I think right. There's a sense of humility that Rabbi Yeshua has, right? He has his conception of truth, but he also is thinking about the greater good of a sense of unity, of making sure that rabbinic authority isn't challenged overall. And then that's where I go back to the end, where then Rabban Gamliel could have said it a bit nicer, you know, like he did it. He realized, and Rabban Gamliel, like, why do you have to really be like, you know, putting salt in the wounds? Yeah, he conceded. Great. Like, we should just be thankful for that. So yeah, thank you. Any other thoughts before I move on?
Let's go.
Okay. If anything comes up, feel free to raise your hand. Okay, so I want to take us now in our synthesis, thinking more about what exactly is this mitzvah, why this one in particular is so powerful. We showed that it's the calendar, and the calendar is a really important point of unification. But this is the first mitzvah in the entire Torah for us as a Jewish people. So there has to be more going on here. And I brought this Rashi that we've actually seen before. And I always quote it like somewhat incorrectly, because the main point of the Rashi is the beginning of Bereshit and this discussion of why do we not start at the first mitzvah of the Jewish people, as opposed to why do we start at Bereshit, the beginning of the entire world? What's the benefit that we have of thinking about God creating the entire world and that somehow being a part of our origin story? And always the end of the Rashi, I always cut it out, but always the answer is like, we have to show that God gave us the land of Israel in case there are ever thieves, ever people question that we're thieves taking the land, which I guess has like interesting political connotations for today, but I find it's like a very silly answer of Rashi, but it's a great question, right? Of like, why is this how the Torah begins? And so I'll read it again for us that we understand. I'll read it in Hebrew, actually. It's a little bit easier than I think the English. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, lo hayat tzarich lechafil et Torah ela me'achodesh hazeh lachem, shehi mitzvah rishona shnitzavu Yisrael umatam patach b'Bereshit. So Rabbi Yitzchak says, why didn't we begin the Torah, or why didn't we need to begin the Torah from this pasuk at the beginning? HaChodesh hazeh lachem. This month will be the beginning of your months, which is then the idea of the sanctification of the moon. Shehi mitzvah rishona shnitzavu Yisrael umatam patach b'Bereshit. Because this is the first mitzvah in the entire Torah for the Jewish people. Shouldn't we start there? Isn't that what the Torah is all about? Why then do we start at Bereshit? Okay, so in the past, we've discussed the benefit of thinking about like how non-Jews fit into the equation, that there's a beauty of narrative, that there's more to the Torah than just being a book of law. But I think that what's important about the structure of this Rashi is it shows the significance of this specific mitzvah. This is seen as the first mitzvah for the entire Jewish people. And now I want to go to a source from Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. There was a collection of conversations he had with Rav Chaim Sabato of Yeshivat Ma'ale Adumim. This is like recorded close to when he died. And he has really interesting ideas about the nature of Kedusha, of sanctification, of how Talmud Torah should be. It's a really fascinating read. And there's an amazing section where he talks about the Cheftza Gavra approach of Kedusha. So this is a term that is familiar in Brisker Derech circles. There's a specific kind of learning of Gemara called the Brisker Derech that started in Yeshiva in Volozhin in the 1800s. And it's an idea of kind of like trying to see the broader philosophical arguments within different machlokot, and that there often is a discussion in the Gemara about specific rituals about what their end purpose is. So cheftza in Aramaic means, are we talking about the object or the gavra or the person? Are we talking about how the person's affected by the object? And so it's like an object subject kind of debate. Are we shaking the lulav because God wants us to shake the lulav and see these like fruits that are connected to fertility, to harvest? Or are we shaking it because we're like shaking it and treating it like a sword and we're warriors? That would be the Gabra approach. Is it about my experience of shaking the lulav as a person? Or is it about like specifically what is the object itself coming to do? So it's pretty, I would say it could seem somewhat pedantic, but he's going to start applying this logic to our understanding of how we understand sanctifying the moon in an interesting way. So this is what he says. But even if there are other witnesses, and even if we are already talking about the 31st day, when we know even without witnesses when the new month will be created, because a month cannot last 32 days, why are the witnesses allowed to desecrate the Sabbath in order to go to Jerusalem? So Rav Lichtenstein is pointing out an interesting detail. Before we were saying about like in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, that there are all these rules about how you can sanctify the new moon. One of the things they say is that you're allowed to actually violate Shabbat in order to travel to Jerusalem to tell the Sanhedrin that it is now Rosh Chodesh, which is pretty wacky, right? There's not a lot of things you can desecrate Shabbat for. You can desecrate to save a life. You could do a Brit Milah on Shabbat, but otherwise it's like not really, there's not many things that can override Shabbat. And yet somehow traveling to be able to declare the new month is significant enough that can override the Shabbat mitzvot, which is pretty serious. That shows that it's really up there. The same as saving a life, the same as showing our commitment to the covenant of the Jewish people. So he's wondering, why is it significant enough to actually violate Shabbat? But not only that, especially with this, like we will know at some point, right? Like there can't be 32 days. So at some point after day 31, I go, oh, I guess it's a new month. You didn't hear from anyone. And yet you're still supposed to be able to desecrate the Shabbat, which is very intense and very powerful. So what's going on here? The Mishnah Rosh Hashanah teaches that whether the moon was seen at its proper time or not, they sanctify it. This means that even if 30 days have gone by, there is no, I'll fix that. There is no need for witnesses to help determine the start of the new month. Nonetheless, the court sanctifies it. There's a qualitative difference between a month sanctified automatically and one sanctified by the court based on the testimony of witnesses, and this discrepancy even justifies desecrating the Sabbath. We see from here that even in a case where the start of the month is already obvious, and thus the witnesses will have no impact on setting the calendar at all, the witnesses make a qualitative difference in the nature of the sanctification of the new moon. The question is always whether the new month will be established by sanctification by man or not. If witnesses come forth, then the new month will be sanctified by man, and this warrants desecrating the Sabbath. So in light of our Chavtza Gavra understanding before, then this is the approach that Rabbi Freudenstein is trained in and teaches. He is talking about the both man or human significance of this mitzvah, and then in and of itself. The Chavtza approach would be, great, it's a calendar. We're going to know after day 32. Who cares? But no, he's saying that there's a Gavra approach. There's an approach that it's about us being able to change the calendar, decide what the calendar is. And that is what is so powerful about this mitzvah. It is not just about, a calendar and it being set, and if it passes, it passes. But there's something about us being able to declare when time begins and what the dates are, that we can transcend a metaphysical notion of time, and that we can decide what time looks like, that's so important to the Jewish tradition that you're able to desecrate the Sabbath for it. So this mitzvah all of a sudden is not just, a pragmatic, okay, I know when the holidays are, oh, I need to be able to unify all of Bnei Israel. It's actually a microcosm of maybe, I would argue maybe the entire rabbinic project, but especially this, of how is human agency viewed within the rabbinic tradition. We could say it's divine law, therefore it all comes from God. But within the Jewish tradition, it's clear that divine law is one that is a partnership with man, so much so that it is so important for man to be able to talk about, to be able to declare the calendar times, that then we can override such significant mitzvah in order to do that. And so I think that's a real testament to what the rabbinic Judaism is all about our ability to be able to see ourselves as divine partners with the divine in Jewish law. And not only to see that as like some kind of necessary evil of like, oh, we live in this world and we're not angels and that's how we have to do it, but it's actually built into the system itself. And I think that's what this mitzvah is all about. And then we think, well, then why is this the first mitzvah? Well, it's actually kind of setting the tone for what's about to come. There's so many mitzvahs that are about to come that might seem like only from God, don't have anything to do with us. We don't seem to have agency, but this is the one we start with. And this is the foundation we're setting from now on. So I think that's why it becomes so significant. It's the first one. And then that's why it means so much to Rabbi Yeshua and Rabban Gamliel. And now I think I'm pretty convinced that this is why it's so important. It's really a lot about how human beings are involved in the unfolding of divine revelation over time, as we see in the Halachic system. And I think that's pretty powerful. And I think that'll make me more excited to see the moon next time I take a look outside. So yeah, that's all I have to share. If anyone has any thoughts they want to share, otherwise we'll wrap up. Sure, Barry.
We're finishing early? Are we allowed to finish early?
Oh, I mean, if you have more to say, you're welcome to share your thoughts. Do you have anything to say, Audrey?
What is the prompt again?
I guess more like, I mean, it's more if you have any thoughts about what we've discussed, but I think that the idea that we're involved in divine law as human beings, I think is pretty powerful.
In the cabinet, I'll put it away after this.
So it's I guess if you have any thoughts, reactions, questions about that, no pressure, obviously.
Okay. That's fine. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, Barry.
I'm back at it. In Barchi Nafshi, I forget the number of the psalm. Is it 104? I forget. There's a phrase that I used at the time I was sending messages to wish everybody a happy Solar New Year. That David Amelech expresses beautifully. The moon, I forget the word he used. The moon, but basically the moon establishes the seasons. The sun knows when to set. So he puts in a phrase or juxtaposes two phrases together about the relationship in our lives between the sun and the moon. And the moon is the thing by which we count days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, days to the 15th of the day of the month of Tishrei for Sukkot. Pesach has to be in the month of Aviv. This is the cornerstone of the start. That's the basis of one of the bases of what we're talking about here. This shall be the first month to you, meaning to us. we came out of Egypt in the month of Aviv. It didn't say Nisan. It becomes Nisan because of the name of the month in another language. Was it Babylonian? I forget. But it came from another language. But Aviv is the month in the Torah. And Aviv is really a season. It's the spring season. And it triggers this whole intercalation or whatever the term is for deciding whether or not there's going to be a leap month of a second month of Adar. Because Pesach cannot come in wintertime, cannot come too soon. And that triggers the other holidays too, right? Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, it's all triggered. So we're complex people. And this is clearly, that's why it has to be a mitzvah, honestly, in my mind. Far be it for me to contradict or differ from any of the scholars we have teaching us and whether they're past or present. But this is a trigger event for me. And I used the metaphor before of heaven in the water. It triggers a lot of things going on, whether it's adding a date to the month, like 29 to 30 days, right, Sophia? Or having that extra month, or when Pesach falls, it's got to fall this way. It's fantastic.
Amazing. Thank you. A manifesto.
I love it.
Amazing. Okay, well, if anyone else wants to share, otherwise that's all I have to share with you tonight. I believe next Wednesday we're not going to be meeting, but we'll be meeting right after that. Like the Wednesday after that, we'll confirm in the shul email. And otherwise, feel free to reach out to me on my Yeshivat Maharat email in the meantime, and I'll see you all then.
Thank you. Shkot. Great class, everybody. Thank you, Sophia.
Amazing. Bye, everyone. Good night.
Good night.